Here's the thing. I'm a Godzilla fan, and usually when people say this, I'm not sure how much they mean it. I don't mean like, oh, I saw two movies and I can name three monsters. Godzilla, another monster with Godzilla in his name, and oh, I know an obscure one. Insert not very obscure monster here. No, what I mean by I'm a Godzilla fan is that I forgot a lot about it since it's been a while since I've seen Godzilla stuff. But even then, I'm requesting death battles between Gara Sharp and Bagan or Bagan. Let me guess, none of you guys know who those are. One of them is an unused monster from the Gamera franchise, and the other is a monster who was not used and was planned to be used on multiple occasions in the Godzilla franchise and one time against Mothra, but also appeared as the final boss in a video game where instead of being white and purple, he was turned brown and disgusting looking. He also might have been the inspiration behind Destroya. Those aren't even the most obscure Godzilla facts I know. But my point is that I'm just kind of getting sick of people saying that they're Godzilla fans, judging the new movies based on one other Godzilla movie in a franchise of what? What is it? 33 movies already? It's a bit iffy how much you want to count the anime as movies. They're disgusting abominations that can rot in hell anyways. I don't personally count them. Let me just TLDR this. I know these videos can be a bit too long, not just mine, but a lot of commentary videos in general. If you want the basic gist and go leave, here it is. Judge Godzilla movies as movies, but not Godzilla movies if you don't know Godzilla movies. Okay, so a more elaborate take on what I just said is the following. A lot of critics are saying that a lot of the newer Godzilla movies made in America, probably due to their weird hate boner against CGI, are not true to the franchise's original roots, and frequently use criticisms against the new movies that are equally, if not more, applicable to the older ones. I am not saying you can't criticize new movies just because older movies had the same problem. That would be dumb. What I am saying is, you know what else is dumb? Saying that a Godzilla movie failed the franchise by doing what every other entry of the franchise did. To go into a bit more detail, I feel like the easiest example to go over this phenomena is Lowart's video on the subject. I was thinking about going over Captain Midnight's, but I feel like it'd be redundant. Also, I do want to acknowledge this near the beginning. I don't have anything against Lowart. I know you hear that a lot, but here's the thing. You can tell I'm telling the truth because in other commentary videos, trust me, I promise you, it won't take very long to figure out who I do have something against. Because unlike a lot of those people, Lowart isn't trying to lie and manipulate to people in order to make other real life human beings look like worse people than they are, using both faulty logic, mental gymnastics. I said both, but I'm actually, there's a third. And just lies. Lowart just made a mistake. He's a good guy. I feel like this video he made was still too narrow sighted and exemplifies the issues I see with critics trying to say what is and what is not good for the fans. Also, it's just kind of nice to make a video about another person that I won't feel half guilty about. Yay. I actually personally recommend Lowart's channel if you're into a lot of the analytical commentary that goes by at a pretty chillax pace. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of sick of the genre of the very straight-laced commentary with nothing interesting really happening aside from education because there's been a lot of that online, and if you're going to do a commentary in order to entertain me, I feel like you need to add in some jokes, some flair, or something exciting, maybe some passion. Who knows? I kind of failed delivering that myself, so I'm just a fucking hypocrite. But moving on, if you're into that kind of stuff, I do recommend Lowart's content. Typically, it seems a bit smarter than this is. Hell, he was like the first guy to basically undo the hypocrisy of the cartoon community's little stupid criticisms because they basically criticize anything filler related in a lot of modern story based shows, but they praised Avatar and Teen Titans for it. So, Lowart actually went after the OG Teen Titans, or at least 2003, not true OG. Enough dawdling. It's 6 minutes in. Wow, I've really delayed stuff too much. I must preface that with this video in particular, I will mostly skip the first general half and go to when he criticizes the American versions instead.
As the years went on and as the future films were made, he may have drifted away from his symbolic position, but the first version of Godzilla wasn't simply a monster or a character. Godzilla was a product of his time. He was clear commentary born from a nuclear blast.
This statement right here might just be the most damning thing he mentions in this video given the second half and what the arguments basi are. Basey? Basises? Basei? Who knows? Basei. Basis is basey. Who knows? Who cares if it's everywhere? Basey. Boosa. My obnoxious personality is an affront against reality.
Godzilla always looked like a puppet of sorts, but that's not a bad thing. He doesn't need to adhere to realism to be relatable. In fact, something about those bizarre, rigid movements reminds us that humans made him. It's a way of constantly showing, through the monster's material construction, that this creature only exists because of human intervention, because of the human creation of the atomic bomb and other weapons of war.
I feel like he immediately falls off the deep end with this part of the video. Even the most hardcore of Godzilla fans I've talked to have never, ever made that connection. And even then, it doesn't really, I don't get how that isn't equally applicable to CGI. If you say CGI looks realistic, then that's a good thing as it makes the monster have more depth, more weight to him. But on the other hand, it also makes the atomic bomb threat feel real. People don't really associate the idea of that looks fake with wow, humans made that. They're more like wow, that looks fake. Also, props for showing the Masuko Goji as he's talking about the reminder of how we as a species created him like we created the atomic bomb. I mean, if that face doesn't fill you with existential dread of humanity's follies, then I don't think anything will. I understand that different interpretations vary from person to person, but this kind of feels like both a stretch to defend suits and a stretch to imply that it was almost intentional, though I do not believe Lowart believes it's genuinely intentional. But either way, I do not see the symbolism in that, and he also does mention this.
As the years went on and as the future films were made, he may have drifted away from his symbolic position.
In fact, the vast majority of the Showa series, which was the first Godzilla series, did not even address the atomic threat at all. Also, once again, CGI is man made, and we can tell it's man made just by looking at it, or a lot of it at least, even when it's kind of unrealistic. I guess critics won't think that's man made, i.e., a symbol of humanity creating it, i.e., our existential flaws. I don't want to be too insulting to say this is pretentious, but that's the only word that I can really think of. So, once again, I mean no offense in saying that. But in addition to being pretentious, I also feel like there's a double standard. Why is one kind of imperfect special effect a reminder of it was being man-made, while the other was not. I know I've harped on this point too much since it's about interpretation, but still, it's frustrating how much of a stretch it feels to make it seem like the suits are better because they innately have this atomic bomb allegory involved with them. It also coattails the biggest problem with this video in that he makes it seem like the Godzilla movies made by Americans failed, a good part due to them not adhering to the very first movie when 1998 came around. About almost 25 or so, I forget the specific number. About 25 other movies were around by that point because wait, let me count. Millennium uh Wait, did the Millennium series have 7? I don't know, man. Lowart even says that we've drifted away in the later movies. So I feel like it's unfair to constantly compare the American movies to the first one in how it does not achieve these allegories, when the other movies seem to get a
Where the
pass.
other Godzilla was impervious to typical man-made weaponry, this enchilada gets baked by missiles. Yes! Where the original Godzilla film introduced and treated its monster in a serious manner, this one takes a more comical tone.
If you want to judge Godzilla for having a comical tone, well, look no further.
Where the original Godzilla breathed out nuclear power and left cityscapes in a hellish state resembling the destruction incurred by an atomic bomb, this one doesn't do that at all. Even if later Japanese Godzilla films change Godzilla's character, his original portrayal is an enormous part of what gives him such staying power. Compared to the original,
I hate how he addresses that the later movies got sillier, but he still just ignores that and just continues to compare this to the original. That's just such a double standard and hypocritical. Yes, the original gives it some staying power, but that's not all of Godzilla's identity. Godzilla is not just an analogy for nuclear power being devastating across the land. If it was, then he'd be like King Kong and only get a few reboots every now and again, but not have a consistently strong franchise throughout over 60 years. Godzilla's identity is just as much, if not more, about fighting monsters and expressing personality through the monster suit, and is also, sadly, about pretty consistently terrible human characters that drag the monster plot down. Like, really, this whole video is basically, hey, this American Godzilla movie, it's not like the original. I know every successor isn't like the original, but let's just ignore that. And I'm not defending the 98 version. That was trash. But, you see, if all the Godzilla movies were expected to just be like the original, it'd be like every other franchise. Here's the thing that makes Godzilla great. It may have elements of the original, but every movie's a new experience and some are marginally worse than others. But to continue saying that this misses the mark of the franchise just because it missed the mark of the original feels like a double standard.
this American Godzilla is devoid of meaning. It's a monster in a monster movie, without any symbolic status to inject it with much needed intrigue.
Once again, you could say that about, I'd say, a solid 29 or 28 movies in the franchise, if I'm being generous. Hell, the Heisei series, which is probably the most consistent of all the series, including its relatively dark tone, is also mostly devoid of the nuclear analogy. Lowart mentioned that this movie is definitely a product of its time. You can't keep expecting every movie for 60 years to reference the same event and how bad it was that whole time. Depth can only get you so far. If you have the same message over and over and over, it will become a redundant and stale franchise. And it would have not lasted for over 60 years.
Instead, there's these Muto. In fact, Godzilla doesn't appear for nearly an hour. And as we watch soldiers run around trying to take care of these other problems, Godzilla fades into the background, emerging only occasionally, and even when he does show up, we hardly see any of the destruction that comes with him. Sure, his roar is awesome and fierce, and he may seem threatening, but he's distant and darkened.
I feel like I have a lot to say here in particular. I do sort of agree that the darkness is probably not a good choice from a director's standpoint, and I'm always frustrated to not see what's going on with the special effects. On the other hand, I feel like there is no problem with taking a bit of a new direction and making the character mysterious, and the build up was excellent, especially before the movie came out. I know that differences with the main character can be controversial, but I feel like if you are completely stagnant, you have a stagnant franchise. I feel like there is nothing innately wrong with having a monster that is mysterious as long as the monster is close enough to the original. There is nothing innately out of character for Godzilla in this movie, but he is right in the following point. I think it was a bit too tough to see. So I believe the balance that needs to be met is whether or not the change to a franchise is a good change on its own, and not compared to the rest of the franchise.
Speaking of which, this movie looks dark. When the monsters are fighting, it's often hard to even tell what's going on. I believe this was done to make the monsters feel more mysterious, while also making them look more realistic. After all, it's harder to see the imperfections in these CGI monsters if there's less detail to see. But that's not really why people like Godzilla. People don't care that he's fake. We know that already. If action and impact must be sacrificed for the sake of realism, then realism should get tossed aside. Whether Godzilla serves as symbol or spectacle, if there was one thing Godzilla hasn't been limited by, it's realism. And that's a big part of his appeal.
I personally never thought it was. I thought it was a hindrance, in all honesty. Not a big one, and it can add to the charm, but inevitably I'll care not. If the monsters are good, the monster fights are good, and they have a lot of character and expression without any dialogue. Godzilla 2014 was truly written by a fan, as it did allude to the origins, but its main focus was the monsters. They showed so much personality. They have very interesting designs, all of them. And I feel bad for the Mutos. You could just see in some expressions and some gifs alone just so much about their personality, how protective they were of each other and how they nuzzled each other, giving each other a nuke. That just says so much about these characters without any dialogue. And yes, I believe monsters are characters in these movies. That's why we watch them. They aren't Godzilla and Miss Anna. They aren't Godzilla and Dr. Sariza. They are Godzilla versus Space Godzilla. Godzilla versus King Kong. Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Even in a lot of the worst Godzilla movies I've seen, they've shown character, and that's a big part of the appeal. They might not all be an allegory to some tragedy that occurred over 60 years ago, but they all show character. And a lot of them have amazing designs, and a lot of them are having impressive fights. Most of them have terrible, boring human characters. Most of them have god awful pacing and a completely tangential human plot that spends most of the movie with. You know what I consistently don't see in Godzilla movies? The oxygen destroyer killing him again, Dr. Sawaiza. with his little eye patch and nuclear/atomic analogies. They are in many films, but they are not in most of them. Typically, when they do reappear, it's for Godzilla's perspective, not ours. For example, the Heisei series was foreshadowing Godzilla's meltdown, also while seeing Godzilla Jr. grow up to become his successor. In the finale, it brought back the Oxygen Destroyer references. The main antagonist, Destroyer, is once again indirectly created by man's follies, with the Oxygen Destroyer making new life of its own. Meanwhile, Godzilla's about to have a nuclear meltdown, so he must be frozen by the Super X. Despite all of these analogies to humans' follies, the most important thing is these creatures that can't even emote and their personalities. Between Destroyer's spectacular devilish design and his creepy forms, in addition to his roar that is literally a cackle, and all of the horrible acts he does, it is shown clear as day that this monster might not talk, but it lives up to its name in a destructive franchise, as this is the only one that deserves to have destroy in its name. Why? Because it's way more evil and way more destructive than the other. He even kills a little Godzilla, and then kind of not. Don't say spoilers. This movie's like almost 30 or 40 years old, dude.
The 2014 film is certainly a step in the right direction, but that step is shaky and unstable. The film may take its titular character seriously, but it isn't even close to being as politically charged as the original.
Also, no other film in the franchise, aside from maybe Shin Gojira, which I have not seen yet, damn it, has been nearly as politically charged. Why is this the only standard a Godzilla movie can be good by? It was one movie. Even if it is the best, movies aren't just made better just by ripping another one off. Not sure how long people can take a fire breathing, indestructible dinosaur and an army of weird, whack ass creatures seriously. Meanwhile, they're fucking talking about, oh my god, this is just like Hiroshima. Because there's only so much you can do with the concept, but there's a lot you can do with Godzilla. And the idea of taking it and running with it in different ways every time is a good thing. The baseline is flexible enough. The baseline was destroyed with 98, where he had none of the trademark traits. He didn't have his epic fire/atomic breath. He looked like a raptor, and he died from missiles. Those were the things constant in every other Godzilla movie. Only thing 2014 doesn't have is that he's CGI the entire time. And honestly, that may bother some, but it doesn't bother me too much. Keeping the core elements is important for a consistent franchise, but changing up the formula, at least slightly, at least adding some ingenuity, and at least not beating the same message to the ground every single movie, is important to maintain a franchise that is not stagnant.
昔のそういう映画と比べてちょっと夢がなくなってきてるんじゃないかなっていうのはまあ気が、しないでもないんですけどね。
That quote gets right to the heart of why people still want to see Godzilla.
Final Wars is beloved, but, that doesn't really have to do with the quote.
But that's not how Godzilla has been throughout the years. He's changed. The content and the context surrounding him has become less sinister and serious. Even so, even if the dream isn't so dark, that duality between the unreal and real is key to Godzilla. Without it, he's lacking. So far, America hasn't been able to get it right.
I still fundamentally disagree, and I do not believe that it is hinged on Godzilla's dream or suspension of disbelief or inferences. I believe his identity is not just that he's a rubber suit dino and that we know man made him, or there's a lot to infer. I don't really believe I saw a great argument for why 2014 did not live up to the original or its successors. He's just kind of vague at this point, so it's a bit tough to pinpoint what I disagree with exactly. Because the 98 version did not lack the visual spectacle and did not lack showing off the monster in spite of him not looking real. He even mentioned this and also mentioned how imperfect the CGI was. So I do not see why it's I don't really understand. Costume Godzilla is okay to be shown and to be shown as being fake because it leaves a lot to the imagination and the dream. With the 98 version, it does not, or at least is not directly addressed. Meanwhile, the 2014 version failed because it was too afraid to show itself. It seems like the problems mentioned here all contradict each other in some way. That it seems like the only way to solve this is to bring back a suit. And to most audiences, they kind of want to have their suspension of disbelief completely submerged because they see an amazing creature spectacle that looks realistic tearing each other up, which there is a definite enjoyment to be seen. It can be enticing as hell to see realism just like that. I don't see why it has to be unrealistic. I feel like it was a limiting factor, but it wasn't the main factor that made Godzilla who he was. Maybe I am missing something after all. Maybe, just maybe, there's something to this that I don't understand. But it feels like it's a bit, maybe, nostalgia blind. Maybe it's anti CGI. I don't really know, but I don't feel like he's being fair because he basically makes it so that he shouldn't show off a bad effect if it's CGI, but it's something to be embraced if it's suit because of meanings that most people wouldn't infer. I personally wouldn't, but each to their own. But if it's good CGI and it's hidden, it's also bad. And I feel like there's a definite middle ground to be had, and I don't think just showing clips of him occasionally being silly disproves that you're focusing way too much on the original. He makes it seem like for most of this video that Godzilla should be compared to the original. It really shouldn't be. It should be another entry in the franchise, and most entries in the franchises end up revolving around some sort of action and a monster. Though, of course, that can be changed formula wise. Though I believe it's more enticing to see a new or old monster get a redone as it fights Godzilla for another time, and they both show, express, and enjoy their personality, you know? I guess the word I'm looking for after a near half hour of all this is arbitrary. This feels like a lot of the standards are just kind of arbitrary because as a Godzilla fan, I've never really seen anything to coincide this with regards to the quality. Also, another thing irritating is I'm seeing people say that the newest Godzilla movie failed as a Godzilla movie because the characters are worse in this one than the others. I haven't seen it yet, but that's literally impossible because I'm pretty sure you can't get worse than zero, and that's how I'd rank a lot of the characters that are humans in many of the other movies. I feel like critics need to look at these movies just on their own if they don't know a lot about Godzilla. Even if they do research, it might not be enough to get the full experience. I think judging it on its own is fair. Even if you're critical of it and you criticize it for things that the other movies do, it's fair. But if you're saying that the other movies did something better, like using a special effect, that you're a lot more biased, then that's not really fair. I feel like you should judge it on its own accord as much as you judge a Godzilla movie. Even if 1998 was an abomination of a Godzilla movie, I admit it's just mediocre as a movie. Once again, as a Godzilla movie, terrible far cry from the franchise. The levels we would judge it on is how accurate it is to the original. Even if the special effects weren't perfect, you know, neither is the original. But I didn't really see any reason as to why Lowart said that CGI that was bad is a bad thing, but man's suit gives the optical illusion or whatever that it's humanity, and it's a constant reminder that one man in a suit is doing all this, which, like, Hiroshima wasn't one man, so that analogy doesn't even make sense. It was supposed to be an analogy for the collective awfulness of man slash America. Godzilla is a lot of things. You can't judge it for not being one thing. You can judge it for not being Godzilla, i.e., indestructible, fire breathing, and tall, upright, powerful, and Also, I'm feeling some positivity right now, so I feel like it's time for some good shout outs. Yeah. An example of this would be the horribly underrated Eve animations, or Eve. You know what? Fuck pronunciation. I'm going to college soon. I can do it then. Anyways, he doesn't upload very frequently, which obviously not good for YouTube, but when he does, it's pretty amazing. And this is some of the early work that we're showing on screen, which means the stuff now is pretty interesting. It's not like the typical animation where, it's parody of the week like it used to be in old YouTube. Instead, here there's a pretty interesting storyline. The creator clearly has an interest in concepts such as evolution and advancements in technology. It's really cool to see them all implemented, and hopefully it doesn't have to reboot the ongoing series again. It hasn't gotten very far because, a man's gotta eat, and this YouTube channel isn't doing him enough good, so I suggest to go check it out. On the other end of the spectrum, hey, I'm not bullying a 15-year-old for once. Wow, a 15-year-old with good edgy humor. I thought that didn't exist. Anyways, Caroline Constar is growing popularity much faster than others, but she's probably one of the few funny YouTubers, or actually of any redeemable quality YouTubers I've seen in the past 2 years. Been a fucking wasteland. Kinda sad that it's a 15-year-old who's this good with such an interesting video style, Typically not what you'd expect. I think some of the adults should learn a thing or two from her. Simgratina not only makes the best electro swing out there, a genre I'm usually not a big fan of, but he also manages to tell stories through his music, or at least, the descriptions of his music. The world building is pretty amazing, the art's beautiful, the music's beautiful, and the world building, did I mention the world building's amazing? I'm not sure if I did. Well, here you go, I did. In addition, the whole concept of a world about electro swing being steampunk, okay, let's face it, there's basically no other logical direction for that to go. Seriously though, support Simgratina, or Gretina, fuck. No more pronunciation. Either way, subscribe to him and go lurking around his Tumblr or other links to find little story nuggets and try to piece them together. It's pretty interesting. And Peggy Suave, the more electro swing and main series on his channel, is not the only story he's working on. There's also one about this humanoid shark. Okay, to be fair, I'm most invested in Peggy Suave. Not gonna lie. Call me a basic bitch, call me a normal fag. You're probably right. To keep this musical train going, Tsukoji is one of the most entertaining music channels I've ever seen. This Frenchman seems to be language fluid in musical lyrics across different languages, which is already impressive enough, but he has so much goddamn fun in his videos and made a fucking stop motion wallpaper video with Mega Man in addition to the song he covered. This guy puts way too much work into his stuff and it shows, and we all love it. He has so much fun, so much energy, and it's just genuinely good whenever he does something. You are sinning to not subscribe to this god. Also, Lowart is usually better than this, so subscribe to him too.
Stripper magician, a wonderful addition to parties and funerals, also police suspicion. I think there's something shiny behind your ear. I can also make your daughter's virginity disappear. Take a look at my magic stick. It makes dreams come true with just one lick.